The car door didn't open. It exploded outward. My husband's hand connected with my shoulder blade, not a push but a shove with the full weight of his disgust behind it. The world tilted. My $8,000 Valentino gown caught on the doorframe, tearing at the seam with a sound like ripping skin, and then I was airborne for one breathless second before the asphalt came up to meet me. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs. My palms skidded across oil-slicked pavement, the grit embedding itself into my skin like 1,000 tiny teeth. The rain was instant, freezing industrial rain that smelled of sulfur and rust, the kind that falls in the dead sector where nothing grows and nothing lives. I gasped, rolling onto my side. The silk of my evening gown, champagne-coloured, chosen to complement the gold motif of tonight's gala, was already turning grey with road filth. My ribs screamed. I looked up at the open door of the matte black Range Rover, at the warm leather interior glowing like the mouth of heaven, and beyond it, at my husband. Silas didn't even turn his head. He was adjusting his cufflinks in the rearview mirror. Platinum and onyx, the ones I'd given him on our 3rd anniversary. His jaw was set in that bored aristocratic line that used to make me feel small. Now it just made me feel erased. "Get out, Elena." His voice was flat, not angry, not cruel, just done. I tried to speak, but my lungs were still struggling to re-inflate. The rain hammered down, mixing with the oil on the road, creating rainbow swirls in the puddles around my hands. "You're boring me with this morality act," Silas continued, finally meeting my eyes in the mirror. His gaze was the colour of slate, cold, impenetrable. "Do whatever you want. Survive. Or don't." He reached across the seat. For one idiotic, hopeful second, I thought he was going to offer me his hand. Instead, he picked up something from the centre console. My silver drafting compass. The antique one my father had given me when I graduated summa cum laude from MIT. The tool that had drawn every line of every building I'd ever designed. Silas rolled down the window. Rain spattered onto the leather. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since he'd thrown me out. Then he smiled. It was the smile he used for investors, for city councilmen, for the camera. "You always miss the fine details, Elena." He threw the compass. It spun through the rain, catching the red glow of the taillights, and struck my cheek just below my left eye. The sharp point sliced through skin. I felt the hot ribbon of blood before I felt the pain. Measure twice, cut once. The door slammed. The Range Rover's engine roared a deep, satisfied growl, and the vehicle lurched forward. I watched the taillights recede into the fog, 2 red eyes fading into the industrial murk of the dead sector. The rain swallowed the sound of the engine within seconds. Then there was only silence. And the cold. I touched my cheek. My fingers came away red, the blood mixing with the rain, streaming down my wrist in diluted pink rivulets. The compass lay beside me in a puddle, its silver surface already tarnishing in the toxic rain. I picked it up. The metal was still warm from Silas's hand. Around me, the dead sector stretched in every direction like the skeletal remains of a giant that had died mid-crawl. Abandoned factories loomed against the charcoal sky, their broken windows like empty eye sockets. Rusted conveyor systems twisted between buildings like exposed intestines. The rain turned everything the colour of old iron. This was the landscape I used to paint in art school, before architecture consumed me, before Silas told me that painting was a hobby, not a career. I'd loved these ruins then. The texture of decay, the honesty of collapse. Living in them was different. I tried to stand. My right heel snapped on the uneven pavement, sending me stumbling forward. I caught myself on my hands, adding fresh scrapes to the existing damage. My knees screamed through the shredded silk. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of something organic and rotting. And then I heard it. A sound like metal scraping against concrete, low, rhythmic. Then another sound joined it. A wet, snuffling breath. I turned my head slowly. 50 feet away, partially obscured by the fog and the rain, shapes were moving between the rusted shipping containers that lined the roadside. 4 of them, low to the ground, the size of large dogs but moving wrong. Too purposeful, too coordinated. Wild dogs. Or the feral descendants of guard dogs left behind when the factories closed. The dead sector was full of them. They hunted in packs. They knew the smell of fear. One of them stepped into a shaft of weak light from a dying street lamp. Its coat was matted with mud and oil. Its eyes reflected yellow. It was staring directly at me. I stopped breathing. The creature's lip curled back, revealing teeth designed for tearing. If I stayed on this road, exposed and bleeding, I would be meat before midnight. I forced myself to my feet, ignoring the broken heel, ignoring the pain in my ribs. The compass bit into my palm where I clutched it. Ahead of me, perhaps a quarter mile through the rain, I could see a faint glow. A single bulb, buzzing above what looked like a loading dock attached to a massive textile mill. The dog growled. The others answered. I ran. My feet pounded against the asphalt, each step sending jolts of pain up my legs. The broken heel made me lurch like a drunk, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard the scrape of claws on pavement accelerating into a sprint. Don't look back, don't look back, don't look back, but my mind was already looking back. Not at the dogs, at the car. At 3 hours ago, 3 hours earlier. The interior of the Range Rover had smelled like new leather and Silas's cologne, something expensive and sharp like crushed black pepper and cedar. I was in the back seat, scrolling through the final presentation for the Vanguard District unveiling, when I noticed the briefcase. Silas's briefcase. The one he never let me touch. It was open on the seat beside him. Just barely. A sliver of cream-coloured paper visible inside. I shouldn't have looked. I knew the rules. Silas had compartments in his life, and I wasn't allowed in all of them. But something about the letterhead caught my eye. US Patent and Trademark Office, my patent application. For the Vanguard District's structural innovation, the modular deep pile foundation system that would allow high rises to be built safely on reclaimed industrial land. My life's work. My name on the future. I reached forward and pulled the folder out. Silas was on his phone murmuring something to the mayor about optics and timing. He didn't notice. I opened the folder. My name wasn't there. Where it should have read Elena Volkov, lead architect, it instead read Isabella Vane, principal designer. The blood drained from my face. I flipped through the pages. Every instance of my name had been covered with correction fluid and replaced. My design diagrams were still there. The precise angles, the load calculations, the innovations that had taken me 6 years to perfect. But the signature at the bottom was Isabella's. Isabella. I looked up, and that's when I realized we weren't alone in the car. She was sitting in the front passenger seat. I'd been so absorbed in my tablet that I hadn't even registered her presence. Isabella Vane, 26 years old, daughter of Mayor Richard Vane, and, until this exact moment, my protégée. I'd met her 3 years ago when she was failing out of her graduate program at Columbia. Brilliant but undisciplined, her professors had said. I'd seen potential, I'd mentored her, I'd brought her onto my team, I'd saved her career. She was wearing a gold sequined dress that probably cost more than my car. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant twist. She was laughing at something Silas had said, her hand resting on his thigh. Silas. My voice came out strangled. He glanced back at me, irritated at the interruption. Then he saw the folder in my hands. His expression didn't change. That's what I remember most. No guilt, no panic. Just a flicker of annoyance, like I'd stumbled onto a surprise party before it was ready. "Oh," he said. "You found that." Isabella turned in her seat. When she saw my face, she didn't have Silas's composure. She smiled. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. "Surprise, Elena. What is this?" I held up the folder. My hands were shaking. "What the hell is this?" Silas sighed and put his phone down. It's a revised patent filing, more politically advantageous. Politically, I couldn't finish the sentence. This is my design, my work. You can't just, actually I can. Silas's voice was patient, like he was explaining compound interest to a child. You signed over intellectual property rights when you joined the firm. It's all very legal. But my name is a liability, he said simply. Your name doesn't open doors anymore, Elena. Isabella's does. Her father is the mayor. The city council loves her. The media loves her. And, frankly, he gestured at me, at my 5-year-old gown, at my minimal jewellery. She looks better in photographs. Isabella laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound. You taught me to seize opportunity, Elena, remember? You said that in your keynote at the Columbia Symposium. Architecture is about vision, but success is about timing and positioning. She leaned back in her seat, crossing her legs. I just seized yours. The car felt like it was shrinking. I couldn't breathe. Silas, we're married. We built this together. No. He cut me off. His voice cold now. I built this. You designed some buildings. There's a difference. I looked at the folder again, saw something else paper-clipped to the back. Another document. This one with a red stamp across the top. Confidential. Geological survey. I pulled it out. Don't. Silas reached back, but I'd already opened it. It was a soil analysis for the Vanguard District construction site, the land we were breaking ground on next month, the foundation of the residential tower I'd designed, the one Silas had pre-sold to 3,000 families. The heat map was blood red. Critical failure risk, ground instability due to subsurface chemical contamination. Recommend deep pile reinforcement to bedrock minimum 200 FT. My original designs had called for exactly that. 200 feet of steel-reinforced concrete pilings. It was expensive, $24 million expensive, but it was the only way to build safely on reclaimed factory land. I flipped to the next page. A revised proposal, signed by Silas. Revised foundation, 80 FT shallow pile. Cost savings, $22 million. You cut the pilings. I looked up at him. Silas, the building will collapse. The ground is toxic waste. You can't. The building will be fine, Silas said, his voice bored again. The inspectors signed off. You paid them off? I made them reasonable. He took the document from my hands and returned it to his briefcase, snapping it shut. And you're not going to say a word about it. I'll go to the state. You'll go nowhere. His voice dropped to something dangerous. You're a co-signatory on these filings, Elena. If this project fails, you go down with it. And I promise you, the media will know whose calculations were used. Isabella was watching this exchange with fascination, like it was a particularly engaging play. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart. That was too poetic. Something structural. A load-bearing wall. I'll tell them tonight, I whispered. At the gala. I'll tell everyone. Silas looked at me for a long moment. Then he told the driver to stop the car. Present. I crashed through a gap in a chain-link fence, the metal tearing at what was left of my dress. The dogs were closer now. I could hear their breath, their claws, the wet sound of their movement. The loading dock was just ahead. 20 feet. 15. I hit the concrete platform at a full sprint and threw myself at the rusted metal door. It was locked. Of course it was locked. The first dog reached the platform. I spun, pressing my back against the door, raising the compass like a weapon. The silver point gleamed in the rain. The dog paused, crouching low, teeth bared. Then a sound split the air. A generator rumbling to life inside the building. The dog's ears flattened. It backed away, rejoining the pack. They watched me for another moment, then melted back into the darkness between the containers. I slumped against the door, my legs finally giving out. The compass fell from my numb fingers, clattering on the concrete. The generator hummed behind the door. Someone, or something, was inside this building, and I had nowhere else to go. The biometric lock glowed red beside the door handle, a small modern intrusion in this landscape of rust and decay. A handprint scanner, the LCD screen cracked but functional. I stared at it, my brain struggling to process through the cold and the pain. This wasn't an abandoned factory. This was a secure facility, in the dead sector, where no one was supposed to be operating. Why would Silas have a secured warehouse in the middle of nowhere? I pressed my palm against the scanner. Red light pulsed beneath my skin. Access denied. Of course. My credentials had probably been wiped the moment Silas decided I was expendable. I looked down at the compass in my hand, then back at the door. I had one option left. 3 years ago, Silas had asked me to design a safe room in our penthouse. A panic room with biometric override codes in case the primary system failed. I'd used the same contractor who installed his office security. Contractors were lazy. They reused code. I found the manual override panel beneath the scanner, pried it open with the compass point, and stared at the keypad. 6 digits. The compass point hovered over the numbers. Think. Silas's birthday? No, too obvious, and he was too paranoid for that. Our anniversary? God, no. He barely remembered it. Then I saw it, scratched into the metal frame of the panel, almost invisible, VD 042119, Vanguard District, April 21st, 2019, the day Silas had bought the land. I punched in the numbers. The lock clicked green. The door groaned open on hydraulics, releasing a breath of warm, dry air that smelled like ozone and electricity. I stumbled inside, and the door sealed shut behind me with a pneumatic hiss. For a moment, I just stood there, dripping onto the concrete floor, my body shaking so violently I couldn't tell if it was from cold or shock. Then I looked up. The interior was nothing like the exterior suggested. The textile mill facade was exactly that. A facade. Inside, the space had been converted into something between a data center and a war room. Server racks lined the walls, their LED indicators blinking blue and green in the darkness. The generator's hum was louder here, a constant mechanical heartbeat. And in the center of the room, spread across a massive conference table, were blueprints. My blueprints. I moved closer, leaving muddy footprints across the pristine floor. My hands hovered over the papers. 3-dimensional renderings of the Vanguard District, elevation drawings, load calculations. Everything was here. But these weren't the versions I'd submitted to the city. These were the originals, the safe ones, the ones with the 200-foot pilings. Someone had archived my real designs. Why? I turned in a slow circle, taking in the room. One wall was covered in filing cabinets. Another had a corkboard dense with photographs and news clippings, images of the Vanguard District site, of Silas shaking hands with the mayor, of Isabella at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. And in the corner near the space heater that was still running was a desk with a laptop. I was about to approach it when I saw the window. It was high up on the western wall, a narrow frosted rectangle, and through it I could see the city skyline. My city. The towers I'd helped build, their lights glowing warm against the night sky. From here in the dead sector they looked like a distant dream, a lie of prosperity floating above the ruin. I'd designed half of those buildings, put my soul into their foundations, their facades, their bones. And Silas had let me, because my work made him wealthy, made him important. But when I found the truth, when I became inconvenient, he'd thrown me away like construction debris. I turned back to the table and started going through the blueprints systematically. Beneath the renderings were the geological surveys, not the sanitized ones Silas had shown the city council, the real ones. I spread the heat map across the table. The residential tower, the centerpiece of the Vanguard District, was positioned directly above what the survey called a subsurface toxic plume. Decades of industrial runoff had created a massive underground lake of chemical waste. The ground wasn't just unstable, it was liquefied poison. My hands moved to the structural analysis. The original specifications I'd drawn up called for pilings that would bypass the contaminated layer entirely. anchoring into bedrock 200 feet down. It was expensive. It was complicated. But it was the only way to keep the building standing for longer than 5 years. The revised specifications, Silas's version, showed pilings that stopped at 80 feet, right in the middle of the toxic layer. I found the calculation sheets. Someone had done the math. Someone had known exactly what would happen. In year 3, minor settling, cosmetic cracks in the facade, nothing alarming. In year 5, major structural stress, load-bearing walls compromised, evacuation recommended. In year 7, catastrophic failure, projected casualties, 600–800 residents. But by year 7, Silas would have sold the management company. Isabella would be in politics, probably running for state senate on her father's coattails, and the liability would fall on whoever was left holding the deed. 3,000 families were going to move into that tower. Teachers, nurses, young couples buying their first home. They'd make dinner in those kitchens, tuck their children into bed in those bedrooms, celebrate birthdays and anniversaries in those living rooms. And then the ground would swallow them whole. I found a file cabinet labelled Communications and pulled it open. Inside were printed emails. I grabbed a handful and started reading. From Isabella Vane to Silas Mercer. Foundation revisions. Cut the deep pilings. I've talked to Daddy. The inspectors will sign whatever we need. The 20 letters you save can go into the luxury amenities. People don't buy safety. They buy marble countertops and rooftop pools. If something happens in 5 to 7 years, we'll be long gone. You'll be in Dubai. I'll be in Congress. My vision blurred. Not from tears. I was beyond tears. From rage. Isabella hadn't just stolen my work. She'd weaponized it. I kept reading, pulling file after file. There were dozens of emails, memos, even handwritten notes. An entire conspiracy documented and archived. But why? Why would Silas keep all of this? Unless insurance. This wasn't an active office. This was a dead drop, a failsafe. If Isabella or the mayor ever turned on Silas, he had enough evidence here to bury them. Mutually assured destruction. I was about to open another cabinet when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the generator or the servers. An engine. Outside. I moved to the frosted window and looked out. Through the distortion of the glass, I could see headlights cutting through the rain. 2 vehicles. Big ones. They were pulling up to the loading dock. Heavy doors slammed. Voices muffled by the walls. Burn it all. He wants the servers melted. My blood went cold. Silas hadn't just abandoned me. He'd sent a clean-up crew. I looked around the room frantically. There was no back door, no windows large enough to crawl through. The only exit was the door I'd come through, the one that opened onto the loading dock, where the crew was right now. I heard the biometric lock beep. Someone was entering the override code. I had maybe 30 seconds. I moved on instinct. The server racks. There was space beneath them. I dropped to my stomach and rolled under the nearest rack, pressing myself flat against the floor. The metal grating bit into my back. Above me, hard drives, Word, and LED lights cast everything in a sick blue glow. The door opened. Boots on concrete. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. 3 sets. Maybe 4. Christ, it's like a fucking refrigerator in here. A man's voice, rough with cigarettes. Just set the charges. We've got 20 minutes before the shift change at the checkpoint. I pressed my hand over my mouth to silence my breathing. Beneath my palm, I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. The cut on my cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, and I realized I was leaving a trail of blood on the floor. The footsteps moved deeper into the room. What is all this shit? Archives. Financial records, probably. Maybe blackmail. Does it matter? It all burns the same. There was a scraping sound, something heavy being dragged, then the sharp chemical smell of accelerant, kerosene or gasoline. The fumes made my eyes water. Make sure you get the server room. Boss was specific about that. One of them moved toward my hiding spot. I could see his boots now, steel-toed, covered in dried mud. He was carrying a red gas can, sloshing liquid across the floor in wide arcs. Some of it splashed under the server rack. The fumes were overwhelming. I bit down on my knuckles to keep from coughing. The man moved past me, dousing the filing cabinets, the desk, the walls. I heard drawers being pulled open, papers rustling. Then a lighter clicked. "Wait," another voice, younger. "There's blood on the floor, fresh." Everything stopped. I stopped breathing. "What?" "Here. Look, blood drops. They lead from the door to—" The boots turned toward the server rack. I had maybe 5 seconds before he crouched down to look underneath. I rolled out the other side of the rack, came up running and grabbed the only weapon within reach, the laptop from the desk. It was open, still powered on. The younger man saw me first. His eyes went wide. "What the—" I threw the laptop at his face. It connected with a solid crack. He went down, nose streaming blood, cursing. But there were 3 others, and they were already moving. I didn't run for the door. They'd expect that. Instead, I ran deeper into the warehouse, toward the back wall where I'd noticed something earlier. Industrial floor grates. Drainage systems for the old textile mill's chemical processing. "Get her!" The cigarette voice man was on me, grabbing for my shoulder. I spun, bringing the silver compass up. The point caught him across the cheek. Not deep, but enough to make him recoil. I reached the grate and dropped to my knees, jamming the compass point into the rusted lock. The metal was old, weak. It snapped. Behind me, lighter clicked again. "Screw it," one of them said. "Burn her with it." I heard the whoosh of ignition. The flames caught faster than I'd expected. The kerosene went up in a wave of orange heat that turned the entire room into a furnace within seconds. The heat hit my back like a physical blow. I wrenched the grate open and dropped into the hole. I fell 6 feet into freezing water that smelled like rust and rot. A drainage pipe maybe 3 feet in diameter. Above me, the warehouse was already an inferno. Black smoke poured through the grate opening. I had to move. I grabbed the hard drive I'd managed to pull from the server rack, waterproof casing, thank God, and started crawling. The pipe was narrow, full of debris, old chemical sludge, things I didn't want to identify. My arms scraped against concrete rough as shark skin. Behind me, something exploded. Probably the generator fuel tank. The shockwave travelled through the pipe and I felt the compression in my chest, in my bones. I crawled faster. The pipe angled downward and suddenly I was sliding, unable to stop, the hard drive clutched to my chest. I slid for what felt like forever, probably only 20 feet, and then I was falling again, tumbling out of the pipe into open air. I hit mud, not pavement. Mud, thick, black, and deep. I went under, the cold shocking the air from my lungs. I flailed, broke the surface, gasped. My hands found something solid, a concrete pylon, part of some old foundation, and I hauled myself up onto it. I was outside. Behind me, maybe 100 yards away, the textile mill was a pillar of flame against the night sky. The fire lit up the dead sector like a second sun. I could see the silhouettes of the men outside watching it burn. Watching me burn, they thought. I looked down at myself. I was covered head to toe in black sludge. The evening gown was gone, just tatters now. My hair was plastered to my skull with filth. The cut on my cheek was still bleeding, but the blood was invisible against the mud. I looked like something that had crawled out of the earth. I looked at the hard drive in my hands. It was intact. Waterproof casing sealed tight. Inside that drive was everything. The surveys, the emails, Isabella's calculations of acceptable casualties. I started laughing. It hurt, my ribs, my lungs, everything, but I couldn't stop. Silas had tried to bury me. Instead, he'd just given me the evidence to bury him. The mud sucked at my legs as I waded through the retention pond, if you could call this toxic soup a pond. Every step released bubbles of methane that burst on the surface with soft, obscene pops. The smell was indescribable. Sulfur and decay and something sweet-sick that coated the back of my throat. I held the hard drive above my head like a torch, the only clean thing left in this world. The fire behind me was dying now, collapsing in on itself. The men had left. I'd watched their trucks pull away. satisfied with their work. As far as they knew, Elena Volkov was ash and melted plastic. Good. Let them think that. I reached the far edge of the pond and pulled myself up onto a slab of broken concrete. My arms were shaking. Everything was shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a cold that went deeper than the rain, deeper than the mud. I needed shelter. I needed to get warm. But most of all, I needed a phone. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The dead sector was a maze of ruins, but I'd studied this area. 3 years ago, during the initial site survey for the Vanguard district, I'd mapped every structure within a 5-mile radius. There was a junction station half a mile north, an old telecom building from the 70s. If any landlines still worked in this graveyard, they'd be there. I started walking. The rain was letting up, but the cold was getting worse. My teeth chattered so hard I bit my tongue, tasted blood mixed with the chemical residue coating my mouth. The torn remains of my dress clung to me like wet paper. My feet were bare. I'd lost the broken heels somewhere in the drainage pipe, and every step on the gravel and broken glass was agony. But I kept walking. I thought about Silas, warm and dry in his tuxedo. At the gala by now, probably. Champagne in hand, telling witty anecdotes to the elite of the city, celebrating the unveiling of a building that would kill hundreds. I thought about Isabella in her gold sequins, laughing that crystalline laugh, taking credit for my designs, for my calculations, for 6 years of my life. I thought about the families who'd already signed contracts, put down deposits, dreamed of their new lives in the gleaming tower I designed to be a symbol of urban renewal. They didn't know they were buying crypts. The rage kept me warm, kept me moving. The junction station materialized out of the darkness like a bunker, windowless concrete covered in graffiti, the door hanging open on broken hinges. I stepped inside. The interior was trashed. Homeless people had camped here, left behind sleeping bags and food wrappers and the charred remains of barrel fires. But in the back, mounted on the wall, was exactly what I needed. A payphone. I laughed again. Who the hell still had payphones? But this was the dead sector. Time moved differently here. Things that were obsolete everywhere else still clung to life in the ruins. I picked up the receiver, listened for the dial tone. It was there. Faint, crackling with static, but there. I had no money. But payphones had emergency bypass. I just needed to remember the number. My fingers were so cold I could barely feel them as I dialed 0 for operator. The line clicked, hissed. Operator, what is your emergency? I need to make a collect call. Name and number, please. I gave her the number. A number I'd sworn I'd never dial again. A number that belonged to a man who terrified half the construction workers in the city, Marcus Thorne. The line rang. Once, twice. Then a voice like rocks in a cement mixer. Who is this? Marcus. My voice came out as a rasp. It's Eleanor. Eleanor Volkov. Silence on the other end. Then, the architect. Yes. You're dead. I saw the news alert. Terrible accident. Car fire on the highway. They identified you by dental records. I looked down at myself. At the mud. At the blood. At the hard drive clutched in my filthy hands. I got better. Another pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was different. Lower. Dangerous. What do you want? I have the soil reports, Marcus. The real ones. The ones that show the Vanguard district is built on a toxic sinkhole. The ones that prove Silas cut the foundation specs to save $20 million. I heard something break on the other end of the line. Maybe a glass. Maybe a hand through drywall. Where are you? The dead sector. Junction station, Route 4. That's 12 miles from civilization. I know. Stay there. Don't move. I'm coming. Marcus, bring a sledgehammer. The line went dead. I hung up the receiver and slid down the wall to sit on the cold concrete floor. The hard drive was still in my lap. I wiped some of the mud off the casing, saw my distorted reflection in the metal surface. I didn't recognize myself. The woman staring back at me wasn't Elena Volkov. Award-winning architect, MIT graduate, the elegant arm decoration of Silas Mercer. She was something else, something forged in fire and ice and toxic mud. She was the thing Silas should have been afraid of. I heard the growl of an engine in the distance, not the smooth purr of a Range Rover. Something rougher, older, a working man's truck. I stood up, walked to the door, and waited. 20 minutes later, a battered F-150 pulled up, its headlights cutting through the rain. The door opened and Marcus Thorne stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4", 260 pounds of scar tissue and rage. He'd worked construction for 30 years before Silas fired his entire union crew to bring in cheaper non-union labour. 3 months later, there'd been an accident on the site. Faulty scaffolding. Marcus's son, Danny, had fallen 3 stories. Danny survived. Barely. He'd never walk again. Marcus had sworn he'd bury Silas. But you can't bury a man with money and connections. You need evidence. Marcus looked at me, really looked. At the mud, the blood, the hard drive. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew better. He reached into the truck bed and pulled out a canvas jacket that smelled like tobacco and sawdust. Held it out. "The gala starts in 40 minutes, Marcus said, his voice flat. "You planning to crash it looking like something out of a swamp?" I took the jacket, put it on. The warmth was immediate, almost painful against my frozen skin. Yes. Marcus stared at me for a long moment. Then something that might have been a smile crossed his scarred face. "Get in the truck." The interior of Marcus's truck smelled like coffee gone cold, cigarettes, and motor oil. I climbed in, leaving black smears on the upholstery. Marcus didn't comment. He just put the truck in gear and started driving. We didn't speak for the first 5 minutes. The dead sector rolled past the windows, empty factories, collapsed warehouses, the skeletons of an industrial past that nobody wanted to remember. In the distance, the city lights grew brighter, closer. "Show me," Marcus finally said. I held up the hard drive. "Everything's on here. Geological surveys, emails between Silas and Isabella planning the corner cutting, inspector payoff receipts, projected casualty numbers." "How bad?" 600 to 800 dead when the tower collapses. Year 7, maybe year 8. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His knuckles went white. 3,000 families signed contracts, I continued. Young couples, teachers, nurses, people who saved for years to afford a down payment. They're moving in next month. And Silas knows. Silas planned it. I turned the hard drive over in my hands. He saved $22 million. That's about $27,000 per projected fatality. That's what he calculated a human life was worth. Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Danny was on the scaffolding Silas told us not to reinforce, said it was over-engineered, said we were wasting time and money. I fought him on it. He fired me, brought in a non-union crew that didn't ask questions." He turned to look at me just for a second before his eyes went back to the road. 3 months later. That scaffolding collapsed. My son fell 38 feet onto concrete. The doctors said if he'd landed 6 inches to the left, he'd be dead. 6 inches to the right, he'd have walked away. Instead, he's in a wheelchair for life. He was 23 years old. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be sorry." Marcus's jaw set. "Be useful. What's your plan?" "We go to the gala. We plug this drive into their presentation system. We show everyone what Silas and Isabella have done. Live. On camera. In front of the mayor, the city council, and every news outlet in the state. Security will stop you before you get within 50 feet of that stage. Not if you're with me." Marcus laughed, a short, bitter bark. "Lady, I'm the last person they'll let through the door. I'm on Silas's blacklist. Probably on the mayor's too." "Exactly." I turned to face him fully. "They'll be so focused on you, they won't see me coming. You're the distraction. I'm the bomb." He glanced at me again. This time he really smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You're crazier than I thought." "Crazy implies I have something to lose." I looked down at myself. at the mud still crusting on my skin, at the blood dried on my cheek. Silas threw me out of a car and told me to die. He sent men to burn me alive. He stole 6 years of my work and handed it to a woman who laughed about killing children. I met Marcus's eyes. I'm not crazy, Marcus. I'm free. There's a difference. The truck rumbled over a pothole. In the distance, I could see the museum, the great hall where the gala was being held. It was lit up like a temple. Golden light spilling from every window. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, men in tuxedos, women in gowns that cost more than the median annual salary. This won't just hurt Silas, Marcus said quietly. The mayor's involved. Isabella. The whole city council probably signed off on those inspector bribes. You're not just destroying one man, you're pulling down the whole rotten structure. Good. They'll come after you. When this is over, they'll use every lawyer, every connection, every dirty trick. Let them. I clutched the hard drive tighter. I have the evidence. I have the truth. And thanks to Silas, I'm already dead. I've got nothing left to lose and everything to expose. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he reached under his seat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it. A sledgehammer. You asked me to bring this, he said. What's it for? I looked at the hammer, at the worn wooden handle, at the steel head that had broken through concrete and brick for 3 decades. Symbolism, I said, and in case the door's locked. Marcus nodded slowly. Then he reached over and offered me his hand. His palm was calloused, scarred, the hand of a man who'd built things with his own sweat. I shook it. My hand was still caked with dried mud, but I shook it anyway. For Danny, Marcus said. For everyone, I replied. The truck rolled to a stop 2 blocks from the museum. Marcus killed the engine. You ready for this? He asked. I looked at my reflection in the side mirror. The cut on my cheek had scabbed over. The mud in my hair made it look almost black. My eyes were sunken, dark. I looked like a ghost. I looked like vengeance. No, I said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. Marcus pulled a towel from behind the seat. It was stained with grease and smelled like turpentine, but it was dry. You should clean up, he said. At least your face. They'll call security the second they see you covered in, whatever that is. I took the towel, held it for a moment, feeling the rough fabric against my fingers. Then I looked at myself in the side mirror again. The woman staring back at me was barely recognizable. The elegant architect who'd left her penthouse 3 hours ago was gone. In her place was something primal, something that had crawled out of the industrial underworld. The mud wasn't just dirt. It was the toxic residue of 50 years of chemical manufacturing. The same poison that was pooled beneath the Vanguard district. The same poison that would seep into the foundation, corrode the insufficient pilings, and bring the whole tower down. I was wearing the crime scene. No, I said, handing the towel back. I want them to see it. Eleanor, they need to see where I've been. They need to smell the dead sector on me. They need to know that while they were drinking champagne and celebrating their fraudulent monument, I was crawling through the toxic waste they're building on top of. I reached up and smeared the mud more deliberately across my cheeks, used my fingers to darken the hollows under my eyes. The cut on my cheek stood out like a brand, a thin line of red against the black. Marcus watched me for a long moment, then he nodded. You look like a prophet, he said. The kind that shows up right before the apocalypse. Good. I pulled down the sun visor and used the small mirror to inspect my work. The mud had dried in places, cracked in others, giving my face texture, depth. I looked like something carved from the earth itself. My hair was still wet, plastered to my skull. I combed my fingers through it, pulling it back from my face. Severe. Unforgiving. The evening gown, what was left of it, hung in tatters under Marcus's canvas jacket. The champagne silk was grey-brown, shredded at the hem, torn at the seams. I could see my own skin through the gaps, bruises already forming on my ribs, scrapes on my shoulders. I shrugged off Marcus's jacket. What are you doing? The contrast, I said. They need to see the dress. They need to recognize that I was one of them. that I was supposed to be on that stage tonight, in that gown, celebrating with them. I adjusted what remained of the bodice. The fabric was destroyed, but it was still recognizable as haute couture, as wealth, as belonging. I'm not a protester they can dismiss, I said, more to myself than to Marcus. I'm not an outsider they can ignore. I'm the architect. I designed their precious monument, and I'm standing here covered in the evidence of their crime. I turned to Marcus. How do I look? He studied me for a long moment. His scarred face was unreadable. Like the truth, he finally said. Like something that can't be buried. I nodded. That was exactly right. Marcus started the truck again. We drove the last 2 blocks in silence, the museum growing larger in the windshield. I could hear music now, strings. Something classical and expensive, laughter drifting out into the night air. They were having a party while Rome burned. We pulled up to the valet stand. The attendant, a young man in a crisp uniform, approached the truck with a confused smile. This wasn't the kind of vehicle that typically arrived at events like this. Marcus rolled down the window. "We're here for the gala," he said flatly. The attendant's smile faltered. He looked at Marcus, then at me in the passenger seat. His eyes went wide. I'm sorry, this is a private event. Invitation only?" "We have an invitation." I held up the hard drive. "We're presenting." "Mom, I think there's been some kind of mistake." Marcus didn't wait for him to finish. He put the truck in park, killed the engine, and stepped out. The sledgehammer was in his hand. The attendant backed away quickly. "We're going in," Marcus said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. I climbed out of the passenger side. My bare feet hit the pristine concrete of the drive. I left black footprints. The attendant was already on his radio. "Security, we have a situation at the main entrance." But we were already walking. Up the marble steps, past the shocked faces of late arrivals in their designer clothes, through the massive bronze doors that had been propped open to let the warm air flow out, and into the great hall. The music stopped first, a string quartet, mid-phrase, trailing off into silence as the musicians caught sight of us. Then the conversation died, like a wave moving through the crowd spreading outward from where we stood at the entrance. 500 of the city's elite, all turning to stare. I didn't hurry. I walked slowly, deliberately down the center aisle. The red carpet, imported, probably cost $50,000, squelched beneath my muddy feet. Each step left a black stain. The hall was exactly as I'd imagined it. Marble columns, gold filigree, crystal chandeliers throwing rainbow light across the crowd. At the far end, a stage had been erected. And on that stage, bathed in warm spotlight, stood my husband. Silas was mid-toast, champagne flute raised. His tuxedo was immaculate, Tom Ford probably fitted to perfection. His hair was swept back in that effortless way that took his stylist an hour to achieve. He looked like power, like success, like the future. Next to him, Isabella was radiant in her gold sequined gown. It caught the light with every breath, making her seem to glow. Her dark hair was arranged in an intricate updo. Her smile was practiced, perfect. And on Silas's other side stood Mayor Richard Vane, silver-haired, distinguished, his hand on Silas's shoulder in a gesture of endorsement. Behind them, a massive screen displayed a rendering of the Vanguard district, my design, my vision, twisted into their lie. The crowd parted around me like I was carrying plague. Women pulled their dresses away. Men stepped back, hands going to their wives' elbows, protective and disgusted. I could hear the whispers starting. What is that? Is she homeless? Security? Where's security? Oh my God, she's filthy. I kept walking. Marcus was 3 steps behind me, the sledgehammer resting on his shoulder like a declaration of war. Silas finally saw me. I watched his face cycle through emotions in real time. Confusion, recognition, disbelief. And then, for just a fraction of a second, fear. He recovered quickly. His mask slammed back into place, but I'd seen it, the crack in his perfect facade. He lowered his champagne glass slowly, stepped to the edge of the stage. "Eleanor?" His voice carried across the hall, amplified by the microphone clipped to his lapel. He sounded concerned, bewildered. "My God, what happened to you? Where have you been?" The crowd murmured. I could see phones coming out, cameras pointing. Good, record everything. I stopped at the foot of the stage, looked up at him, at Isabella whose perfect smile had frozen into something brittle, at the mayor whose hand had dropped from Silas's shoulder. "I've been to the foundation," I said quietly. But in the silence of the hall, my voice carried. "The real one. Not the one you're selling." Silas's eyes flickered to the hard drive in my hand, then back to my face. "Darling, you're not well. Let me get you some help." "I don't need help, Silas." I took a step closer. "I need a microphone and a USB port. You have both." His jaw tightened. Behind me, I heard the heavy tread of security guards approaching. Silas made a small gesture with his hand, a signal. The guards accelerated. Marcus turned, planted himself between them and me. "Gentlemen," he said quietly. "I wouldn't." The first security guard was young, maybe 25, all muscle and confidence. He reached for Marcus's arm. Marcus didn't even look at him. He just shifted his weight and the sledgehammer came off his shoulder in a smooth arc that stopped precisely 1 inch from the guard's face. The guard froze. "I said I wouldn't," Marcus repeated. 3 more guards were converging now, forming a loose semicircle. The crowd was backing away, creating a widening circle around us. Some people were leaving, hurrying toward the exits. Others were filming, phones held high. On stage, the mayor was leaning towards Silas, whispering urgently. Isabella had taken a step back, her hand on Silas's arm. "Eleanor." Silas's voice changed. No more concern, just ice. "You're making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself. Whatever you think you found, I found your murder file." I cut him off. My voice was louder now, steadier. "I found the geological surveys you hid. The ones that show the Vanguard district is built on a toxic sinkhole. I found the emails where you and your mistress calculated how many people would die when the building collapses." The murmuring crowd went silent again. This time the silence was different, heavier. "That's absurd," Silas said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "You've clearly suffered some kind of 600 to 800 casualties," I continued. "That's what your own structural engineer projected. Year 7, maybe year 8. The foundation you approved, the one that cuts the pilings from 200 feet to 80, it won't hold. The building will settle, crack, and then it will collapse." I held up the hard drive. "It's all here. Every document, every email, every bribe, including the inspector payoffs authorized by Mayor Vane." The mayor's face went white. Isabella laughed. It was a high, nervous sound. "This is insane. She's clearly having some kind of psychotic break." "I'm having a moment of clarity," I said, looking at her. "At my former student, my protégé. You wrote to Silas that if the building collapses, you'd both be in the Caymans by then. You calculated $27,000 per projected fatality. You called it an acceptable cost-benefit ratio." Isabella's laugh died. Her hand tightened on Silas's arm. "Security!" Silas's voice cracked with anger now. "Remove her! Now!" The guards moved again. Marcus swung the sledgehammer in a slow arc, forcing them back. "Touch her," Marcus said, "and I start breaking things, starting with kneecaps." "Call the police!" someone in the crowd shouted. "Yes," I said loudly. "Please do. Call the police. Call the state attorney general. Call the FBI. Call everyone. Because this," I shook the hard drive, "is evidence of criminal negligence, of fraud, of corruption, and of 3,000 families who are about to move into a death trap." I could see doubt rippling through the crowd now. People looking at each other, at the stage, at the rendering of the Vanguard district behind Silas and Isabella. "She's lying." Isabella's composure was cracking. She's She's a disgruntled employee who was fired for— I wasn't fired, I said. I was thrown out of a car in the dead sector and left for dead. 3 hours ago. By him. I pointed at Silas. After I found these documents in his briefcase. Silas's mask was completely gone now. His face was red. A vein pulsed in his temple. "You're making a mistake, Elena," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "A very serious mistake. Whatever you think you know. I know you sent men to burn your archive. I know they thought they killed me when they torched the building. I know you expected me to be ash right now, not standing here holding the proof of your crimes." I took another step toward the stage. The guards tensed, but Marcus was still there, sledgehammer ready. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "I'm going to walk up those stairs. I'm going to plug this drive into your presentation laptop, and I'm going to show everyone what you're really building. Your choice is simple. You can let me, or you can have your security guards assault me, on camera, in front of 500 witnesses and a dozen news crews." I could see the calculation happening behind Silas's eyes. The risk assessment, the cost-benefit analysis. He was still trying to find an angle. A way to win. "You have nothing," he said finally. "Whatever's on that drive, it's stolen property, illegally obtained. It won't hold up in court." "Maybe not," I agreed, "but it'll hold up in the court of public opinion. And last time I checked, 3,000 families don't need a jury verdict to cancel their contracts." The crowd was buzzing now. Low conversations. Arguments. Someone near the back shouted, "Let her speak." Others joined in. "Show us what's on the drive." "What are you hiding, Mercer?" Silas's hand moved to his pocket. For a horrible second, I thought he might actually have a weapon. But when his hand emerged, he was holding his phone. He pressed a button, spoke into it quietly. "Sir?" A new voice behind me. I turned. The head of security had arrived. Unlike the young guards, this man was older, greyer. He had the look of ex-military, and he was carrying something. A taser. "Get her out of here," Silas said into his microphone. The words echoed through the hall. "Use whatever force is necessary." The head of security raised the taser. Marcus stepped between us. "No," a voice rang out from the crowd. "Wait." Everyone turned. A woman was pushing her way forward. Late 50s, grey hair, wearing a black dress and a press badge. I recognized her, Catherine Mills, investigative reporter for the state's largest newspaper. She'd won a Pulitzer 3 years ago for exposing corruption in the Transit Authority. She walked right up to me, looked at the mud, the blood, the torn dress. "You're Eleanor Volkov," she said. "The architect of record for the Vanguard district." "Yes. And you're claiming that building is structurally unsafe." "I'm claiming that building is a tomb." Catherine turned to face the stage, to face Silas. "Mr. Mercer, if you have nothing to hide, let her show us what's on that drive. Let the public see the evidence. Unless you'd prefer we report that you used violence to silence your own chief architect at a public event." Silas's face was purple now. "This is blackmail," he hissed. "No," I said. "This is journalism and justice, and about 3,000 families who deserve to know the truth before they sign over their life savings." The standoff held for another 10 seconds. Then Silas made his decision. "Fine," he spat. "Come up here. Show us your evidence, and when it turns out to be nothing but the ravings of a disturbed woman, I'll have you arrested for harassment, trespassing, and defamation." He stepped aside. Isabella moved with him, her eyes locked on me with pure hatred. I walked up the stairs. My muddy feet left prints on the pristine white steps. My torn dress trailed behind me, the compass still in my pocket, pressed against my hip. I reached the stage, stood in the spotlight. The heat of it was overwhelming after the cold of the dead sector. Behind me, the massive screen showed the gleaming future of the Vanguard district. Glass, and steel, and lies. I walked to the podium, found the laptop, plugged in the hard drive. The screen went black for a moment. Then it filled with a heat map. Blood red, the toxic plume beneath the construction site, rendered in excruciating detail. The crowd gasped. The silence in the Great Hall was absolute. 500 people stared at the screen, at the crimson heat map that showed the underground lake of industrial poison, at the numbers, at the projections, at the truth rendered in high definition. I didn't say anything yet. I just let them look. I navigated to the next file, the original geological survey, the one with the red stamp, critical failure risk. Then the revised survey, the one Silas had submitted to the city, with my safety recommendations removed, with the deep pilings cut, with the inspector's signature, bought and paid for, at the bottom. Someone in the crowd made a sound, a sob, maybe, or a gasp of horror. I opened the email folder, from Isabella Vane to Silas Mercer, Foundation Revisions. Cut the deep pilings. I've talked to Daddy. The inspectors will sign whatever we need. Isabella's face on stage was white. She was backing away, but there was nowhere to go. I kept scrolling, email after email, the casual calculation of acceptable casualties, the offshore accounts where the savings would be hidden, the timeline for when Silas and Isabella planned to leave the country, 2 weeks after the tower's grand opening. I found the audio file, the one I'd discovered in the archive's communication logs, a recorded phone call between Isabella and her father, the mayor. I clicked play. Isabella's voice filled the hall crystal clear. Daddy, it's fine. If something happens, and it probably won't for years, we'll blame the contractor. We'll blame the architect. Hell, we'll blame Elena herself. She signed off on the final plans. Even if she didn't know what we changed, by the time anyone figures it out, I'll be in Congress and Silas will be in Dubai. 3,000 families signed contracts worth $400 million. That's a lot of campaign contributions. Mayor Vane's response. And you're certain the inspectors won't talk? They're making $200,000 each to lose some paperwork. They won't talk. The recording ended. The mayor was trying to leave the stage. 2 state police officers, not city police, I noticed, blocked his path. When had they arrived? I looked out at the crowd and found Catherine Mills. She was already on her phone, probably filing her story in real time. These documents, I said into the microphone, my voice finally cutting through the shocked silence, represent 6 years of my work, my designs, my calculations, my innovations that would have made the Vanguard district safe. I pulled up my original blueprints, the beautiful complexity of the deep pile foundations system, the reinforced concrete, the engineering that would have cost more but saved lives. Silas Mercer took those designs and gutted them. He removed every safety measure that was expensive. He reduced the foundation specs by 60%. He saved $22 million. I clicked to the structural engineer's report, the one with the casualty projections, and he did it knowing that in 7 years, this building would collapse, knowing that 600 to 800 people would die, knowing that 3,000 families would lose everything, their homes, their savings, their loved ones. My voice cracked. I hadn't meant for it to, but the weight of it all was crushing. He did it because the math worked for him. $27,000 per projected death. That was the acceptable cost-benefit ratio. I looked at Silas. He was frozen, his mask completely shattered. He looked old suddenly, small. You told me to do whatever I wanted, I said quietly. The microphone still picked it up. You threw me out of the car in the dead sector and told me to survive or die. You sent men to burn me alive in your archive. You thought I was ash? I touched the cut on my cheek, the one from the compass. But I survived, and I brought back proof of everything you are. Silas's face twisted. The rage, the fear, the desperate need to regain control. It all surfaced at once. You destroyed my property, he snarled, stepping toward me. You stole confidential documents. You're a criminal. I'm a witness, I corrected. To mass murder, premeditated, calculated, profitable. Shut up! Silas lunged. He grabbed the laptop, trying to yank it away from me. The hard drive popped loose, clattered across the stage. Marcus was already moving, but Silas was faster than I expected. His hand closed around my throat. "You stupid bitch," he hissed in my ear, quiet enough that the microphone didn't catch it. "You've ruined everything. Everything I built. Everything I built," I choked out. "You just put your name on it." His grip tightened. The world started to grey at the edges. Then Isabella screamed, not in fear, in rage. She had picked up something from the podium, a crystal award, heavy, angular. She was raising it above her head, aiming for mine. "You ruined us!" she shrieked, but Marcus was there. His massive hand caught her wrist. The award fell, shattered on the stage with a sound like ice breaking. Isabella clawed at him with her free hand, her perfect composure completely destroyed. "Let go of me! Do you know who I am? My father." "Is being arrested," Catherine Mills called from the crowd. She held up her phone. "The State Attorney General just issued warrants. For him, for you, and for Mr. Mercer." Silas's hand loosened on my throat. I sucked in air, stumbling back. He looked out at the crowd, at the cameras, at the state police officers approaching the stage. "No," he said, just that one word, like he could refuse reality itself. "Silas Mercer." One of the officers reached the stage. "You're under arrest for criminal negligence, fraud, bribery of public officials." "I'm the victim here." Silas's voice rose to a scream. She destroyed my archive. She assaulted me." "Sir, you currently have your hands on her throat." Silas looked down, at his own hands, still on my neck. He let go like I'd burned him. That's not... She attacked first." The officer pulled out handcuffs. "And Silas Mercer, developer of the year, darling of the city council, the man who'd stolen my work and tried to bury me in the dead sector, broke." He lunged again. Not at me. At the hard drive on the stage floor. If he could destroy it, if he could smash the evidence, maybe he thought he still had a chance. He never reached it. Marcus's boot came down on his wrist. I heard the crack. Silas howled. "That's for Danny," Marcus said quietly. The officers swarmed then, handcuffs on Silas. On Isabella, who was crying now, mascara streaming down her face. On the mayor, who'd been caught trying to slip out the back entrance. The crowd was chaos. People shouting, cameras flashing, reporters rushing the stage. Catherine Mills reached me first. "Mrs. Volkov, Elena, can you give us a statement?" I looked at her, at the camera behind her, at the city beyond the museum walls. "Check your foundations," I said. My voice was hoarse from Silas's grip, but it was steady. "Before you build anything, before you buy anything, check the foundations. Make sure they're real, make sure they're safe, because the people who profit from cutting corners don't live in the buildings they destroy." Catherine nodded. "And Silas Mercer?" I looked at him, handcuffed now, being led off the stage. He was still screaming about lawyers, about lawsuits, about how this was all a misunderstanding. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver compass, the one he'd thrown at me, the one that had cut my cheek. I walked over to where the officers had stopped him, looked him in the eye. "You told me to measure twice and cut once," I said. I pressed the compass into his handcuffed hands. Let him feel the weight of it. "You missed a measurement, Silas, and now you're buried in it." The aftermath was chaos. The police escorted Silas, Isabella, and the mayor out in handcuffs. The crowd spilled out onto the museum steps, everyone talking at once. Reporters surrounded Catherine Mills. Camera crews fought for angles. I stood on the stage alone for the first time in hours and looked at the screen behind me, my design, my life's work, corrupted into a weapon. Marcus appeared beside me. He didn't say anything, just stood there, solid and present. "They'll demolish it," I said quietly. "The Vanguard district, they'll have to." "The foundation is compromised. Good. 6 years of work, gone." "No." Marcus shook his head. 6 years of work stolen. That's different than gone." He was right. But it didn't make it hurt less. A state police detective approached us, an older woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Ms. Volkov, I'm Detective Sarah Chen. I'm going to need you to come down to the station to give a full statement. And, she gestured at me, at the mud and blood. We should probably get you to a hospital first. I'm fine. You're hypothermic, injured, and you were assaulted on camera 30 seconds ago. You're going to the hospital. I was too tired to argue. They brought me to St. Catherine's, put me in a private room. A nurse cleaned the cut on my cheek. It would scar, she said, but not badly. They treated me for exposure. For the chemical burns from the toxic mud, for the bruises on my throat from Silas's hands. The hard drive was logged as evidence. The files were backed up to multiple secure servers. Catherine Mills's article went live at 2 a.m. City's crown jewel project, exposed as death trap. By morning, it was the top story in every news outlet in the country. The mayor resigned before noon. By evening, the city council had held an emergency session to halt all construction on the Vanguard district. By the end of the week, the FBI had opened a federal investigation. I watched it all from my hospital bed. Marcus sitting in the chair beside me, bringing me terrible coffee and not talking much. On the third day, they let me leave. I had nowhere to go. The penthouse I'd shared with Silas was technically marital property. My bank accounts were frozen pending the investigation. I owned nothing but a hospital gown and Marcus's canvas jacket. You'll stay with me, Marcus said, not a question. Marcus, my house has 3 bedrooms. 2 of them are empty since my ex-wife left and Danny moved into the assisted living facility. You're staying. I was too grateful to refuse. His house was small, blue-collar neighborhood. The furniture was worn but clean. He gave me Danny's old room, teenage posters still on the walls, a twin bed with a quilt his grandmother had made. It was the first place I'd felt safe in years. The trial took 18 months. Silas fought it, hired the best lawyers money could buy, tried to claim I'd fabricated the evidence, that I was a scorned wife seeking revenge, that the emails were taken out of context. But the hard drive was authenticated. The geological surveys were verified by independent engineers. The inspectors, faced with federal charges, flipped and testified against everyone. Isabella tried to make a deal, claimed she was manipulated by Silas, that she was young and naive and didn't understand what she was doing. The jury didn't buy it. Her own emails condemned her. The casual calculation of acceptable deaths. The jokes about being in the Caymans while bodies were pulled from rubble. The mayor died before the verdict. Heart attack in his holding cell. Some people said it was justice. I just felt empty. In the end, Silas got 23 years. Isabella got 15. 36 city officials were indicted. The construction company that had accepted the modified plans was bankrupted by lawsuits. And the Vanguard district site sat empty. A hole in the ground. A monument to greed. 6 months after the verdict. I stood at the edge of the construction site. Dawn was breaking over the city, turning the sky from charcoal to rose gold. The dead sector stretched behind me, still abandoned, still ruined, but somehow less threatening now. Or maybe I was just less afraid. The city had approached me 3 weeks ago. Through lawyers, through intermediaries, through carefully worded letters. They wanted me to redesign the Vanguard district. They wanted me to do it right this time. I'd said no at first. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. How could I put my soul into something again, knowing how easily it could be stolen, corrupted, destroyed? But then I'd visited Danny. Marcus's son lived in a facility on the east side. Bright, clean, with good nurses and therapy equipment. He was 26 now, would never walk again. But he was alive, and he was fighting. And when I visited him, he'd asked me what I was going to do next. I don't know, I'd admitted. I'm afraid to build anything, afraid someone will take it, break it. Danny had looked at me with eyes that had seen too much pain for someone so young. So let them try, he'd said. You build it right. You build it safe. You build it so even if they steal your name, People are still alive to remember who really did the work. He'd smiled then. Buildings outlast bastards, Elena. Build something that matters. So here I was, standing at the edge of the site with new blueprints rolled under my arm. The design was different this time. Not a single monolithic tower, but a cluster of mid-rise buildings. Affordable housing, mixed use, community spaces on every level, and foundations, proper foundations that would last 100 years. I'd insisted on full transparency. Every calculation published, every decision documented. Independent inspectors at every stage, paid by a community oversight board, not by developers. They'd agreed to all of it. The scandal had made them desperate for redemption. I heard footsteps behind me. Turned. Marcus was there carrying 2 cups of coffee from the food truck that had set up near the site entrance. He handed me one. "You ready?" he asked. I looked at the empty lot, at the space where something terrible had almost been built, at the possibility of something good taking its place. I touched the scar on my cheek. It had healed into a thin white line. People asked about it sometimes. I told them the truth, a reminder that beauty can cut, that love can wound, that the people you trust can try to bury you. But I never told them the rest, that sometimes, when you're buried, you find out what you're really made of, that sometimes the dirt doesn't kill you, it just shows you where the fault lines are. "Yeah," I said, "I'm ready." I pulled the compass from my pocket. The silver was tarnished now, but I'd never had it cleaned. I liked it better this way. Marked, scarred, still functional. I walked onto the site, found the exact center point, the spot where I'd calculated the main courtyard would be, the heart of the community I was going to build. I knelt down, heedless of the mud on my jeans, and pressed the compass point into the earth. Measure twice, I thought. I drew the first circle. Perfect. Precise. True. Cut once. Behind me the sun crested the skyline. Light spilled across the dead sector, turning rust to copper, decay to patina. The ruins looked almost beautiful. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my hands, and looked at Marcus. "Let's build something," I said. He nodded, raised his coffee cup in a salute. "2 foundations," he said. "2 foundations," I echoed, "and to the architects who know what they're worth." The construction crews would arrive in an hour, the city officials, the community board, the reporters who still followed my story. But for now, in this moment between dark and light, it was just me and the earth and the promise of something real. I was no longer Silas Mercer's wife, no longer the betrayed architect, no longer the woman thrown from a car and left for dead. I was Elena Volkov, and I built things that lasted. 3 years later, the Vanguard Commons opened to its first residents. Not the Vanguard District. I'd insisted on changing the name. The towers, 6 of them, medium-rise, human-scaled, were filled before construction finished. Teachers, nurses, young families, the people who actually built cities, not the people who profited from them. I attended the opening ceremony. Catherine Mills was there still covering the story. Marcus brought Danny, who rolled his wheelchair through the central courtyard with an expression of wonder. "You did it," Danny said, looking up at the buildings, at the community gardens on the terraces, at the children already playing in the splash fountain. "We did it," I corrected. There was no ribbon cutting, no speech from corrupt officials, just families moving into homes with foundations that would hold. I didn't stay long. Let them have their moment without the ghost of what almost was. As I was leaving, a young woman approached me, mid-20s, professional clothes, nervous smile. "Ms. Volkov, I'm Rachel Kim. I'm an architecture student at Columbia." I tensed. Columbia. Where Isabella had studied, where I'd mentored her. "I just wanted to say," Rachel hesitated, "thank you for showing us that doing the right thing matters more than pleasing the people in power. My professor assigned your congressional testimony as required reading. The part where you said, I'd rather be broke and honest than rich and complicit. That changed how I think about this profession. She pulled out a silver compass, old, tarnished. My grandfather gave me this. He was a carpenter. He always said good work doesn't need to hide. She smiled. I thought you'd understand. I looked at the compass in her hand, at the young woman who reminded me of myself a decade ago, before Silas, before the betrayal, before I learned that integrity has a price, and sometimes you pay it in blood and mud and fire. Keep it sharp, I told her, and never let anyone tell you that safety is too expensive. The only thing that's too expensive is the cost of cutting corners. Rachel nodded, shook my hand, walked away with her head held high. I watched her go, then looked back at the Vanguard Commons one last time. The building stood solid against the sky. My design, my calculations, my name in the cornerstone. No one could remove it this time. We'd etched it in granite. Elena Volkov, architect, 2023-2026. Built to last. I walked back to my car, a used Honda. Nothing fancy, but paid for with money I'd earned honestly. Marcus was waiting, leaning against his truck. One more site to visit, he asked. I knew where he meant. We drove to the dead sector. The textile mill where I'd nearly died was gone now, demolished. The toxic waste had been excavated and properly disposed of. The land was in remediation, would be for years. But at the edge of the site, the city had erected a monument. It was simple. A steel beam from one of the old factories, standing vertical, and on it, a plaque, in memory of all those harmed by corruption in construction, in honor of those who spoke truth at great personal cost. May we always choose safety over profit, integrity over expedience. Check the foundations, EV. I stood before it, hands in my pockets, the wind whipping my hair, the scar on my cheek itched in the cold. You think it'll make a difference? Marcus asked quietly. The monument, the trial, all of it. I paused, choosing my words carefully. I think it'll make a difference for some people. The ones who are looking for permission to do the right thing. The ones who needed to see that integrity doesn't always lose. And the Silases of the world? I smiled grimly. There will always be Silases. Men who see human life as a line item, who calculate acceptable casualties. But maybe if enough people check the foundations, the Silases don't get to build their tombs. Marcus nodded. We stood in silence for a moment. Danny's getting married, he said suddenly. I turned to him surprised. What? Met a woman at physical therapy. Another patient. She's in a wheelchair too. Spinal injury from a car accident. Marcus's scarred face split into an actual smile. They're crazy about each other, planning a wedding next spring. Marcus, that's wonderful. He wants you to be there. Said you're family now. Something tight in my chest loosened. I'd be honored. We walked back to the trucks. The dead sector stretched around us, slowly coming back to life as the city reclaimed the land. It would be years before anything grew here, before anything was built. But it would happen. I'd make sure of it. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. At the monument, at the ruins becoming something new. I thought about Silas in prison, his perfect facade finally and permanently shattered. I thought about Isabella, who'd learned too late that there are some things you can't steal your way into, like respect, like legacy, like the knowledge that what you built actually mattered. I thought about the 3,000 families who didn't die, who were alive right now because I'd crawled through toxic mud and fire and refused to stay buried. And I thought about the compass in my pocket, still sharp, still true. Measure twice, I thought, cut once, build something that lasts. The city lights glowed ahead of us, golden and warm against the darkening sky. I was going home, not to a penthouse, not to a mansion, to Marcus's spare bedroom with Danny's old posters on the walls, to terrible coffee and honest company, to a life I'd built from the ruins of everything I'd lost. And it was enough, more than enough. It was real.